Please welcome John Emerson, Director of Cloud Product Sales for Symantec.
What I'd like to do over the course of the next half hour, and I promise I'll do my best not to keep you late, is to first briefly talk about a program that some of you may be familiar with. If you're not, hopefully we'll expose that to you. And then using the priorities of that program, what I'd like to do is just show you how we can segue from some of those priorities and assist you in accomplishing some of your objectives for both cloud and other collaboration services. So as we go through this here, I'll try to save time at the end of the discussion for questions, but if we don't get to that, I'm more than happy to stick around afterwards to answer any questions you guys might have, okay? All right, so with that, let me just briefly talk, and I apologize, there's a little bit of a lag between the time I push the button and the time it shows up. So you're familiar with the various aspects inside of your agency, what we call termination points. These are really the areas that you need to secure. Email, your network, your endpoints, and of course, near and dear to our hearts, cloud. Didn't introduce myself, but before I came to Symantec, I've been with a series of startups, and I had a fair amount of activity with cloud. So now I manage sales of cloud products to our federal government customers. So this is the area that I focus on. Across the agency, though, what we're starting to see is more of a leverage of services across these various, what we call termination points. One of them is becoming very popular, user behavior. This is essentially the Edward Snowden problem, looking at either external players or internal individuals who may pose a threat to your organization. Threat protection, we talked about that on the panel. This is leveraging information ideally from some sort of a centralized source where they're collecting signatures and malware. This is basically the anti-malware, antivirus problem. And then data protection is an area where you're looking at ideally categorizing the data that you have in use and ensuring that it's properly secured throughout your organization. So the ideal architecture, you guys I'm sure have seen this sort of a thing before, is scenarios where you're leveraging those core services across the agency for the aspects of your organization that you're trying to secure. And if you do this right, you build it once and then you put that in place for the whole organization, rather than having multiple systems that, for example, do virus and anti-malware or user behavior, something like that. Okay, so with that said, what I'm going to talk about today is just the intersection of these two. How do you extend your data protection services or your data protection security capabilities up into the cloud, and how do you make those two work together seamlessly? All right? Now I'm going to start with a program that, and Jeff will attest, we didn't collaborate on this. We have not talked about this, but he mentioned CDM in part of the panel discussion. And just very briefly would like to give you guys, for those of you who are not familiar, this is a program built by DHS specifically for civilian agencies. And the nice thing about the CDM program is that they will give you assistance, direction, and funding. And there are two priorities in particular: cloud and data protection. In fact, Scott, why don't you go ahead and raise your hand? We actually have a gentleman on our team whose sole job is to assist our customers in managing these types of activities. So if you're interested in learning more, Scott's available. Scott, you told me yesterday, I think, about a third of next year's priorities in terms of budget and funding is data protection. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And in fact, this slide that you have here right now, if you can hear me, this slide that you have here right now is actually a Kevin Cox slide, who runs this program for CDM. And so they prioritize that. The preliminary budget, I haven't seen the final budget, but a third of that is for data protection. They also have right now different primes on this going out and doing an analysis of agencies' position around cloud and mobile.
So one of the nice things about being the speaker is that when a friend of yours gives you an ugly slide, you can make him explain it. So I'm going to keep him on the stage here.
They wouldn't give me a microphone because they didn't want me to talk too much. But if you don't know, CDM is continuous diagnostics and mitigation. The whole process that drives this contract is a request for service process. Basically, agencies submit a statement of work with objectives of how they want to get something accomplished. Based on that previous slide, it helps out. It goes into the CDM program office along with GSA. They analyze it. They make sure they're comfortable with what that statement of work is, and then they send it out to whoever's agency prime, whether it's Booz Allen, CACI, Mantec, or CGI. They have 14 days to analyze that and then submit a plan on how they would implement it. That goes back to the GSA and to the CDM program office. They either accept it or negotiate some, and then eventually goes into a task order for that systems integrator to implement what the agency is looking for. So that's very simplistic. As John said, I'm here. I'll be here afterwards. I'd be happy to talk to you in more detail.
Okay, he's done.
Okay.
Good. So the key point of the CDM program, again, is to give you assistance and funding, making sure everybody got that. In fact, Scott, I think you said you can get up to 2 years of your service fees and so forth paid for, right?
OMB has authorized up to 2 years. Now, initially, if you go back to that previous slide, the data protection, they're in an analysis mode right now. CDM is. I know that one of the primes is working on a pilot for one agency. They've also worked on some feedback to the CDM program office. Where they're really looking at in all of this initially is high-value assets.
Yeah. So let me, if I can, then segue into the discussion of two of those high-value assets. This is, apologies for the commercial, I just wanted to make sure there was a practical punchline here for you. There, in the area of data protection, you'll hear me occasionally cross into a commercial term that we use, data loss protection, or DLP. The key term is data. Okay, so if don't get mixed up on the terms. For cloud security, I'm going to talk about a cloud access security broker, and I'll try to keep the conversation somewhat generic in terms of capabilities and so forth. But just wanted to let you know we do have those capabilities today available on GSA. They are available to be procured through the CDM program. So it's an important takeaway for you. There's an area, an opportunity where we can work together to agency in solving your problems in using this program. Okay? So with that, let me just kind of move forward. Let me first talk about the data protection component. As I indicated, we leverage a capability called DLP. One of the nice things about working for Symantec, and I got to tell you, as I indicated, I've done several startups in my career. One of the biggest reasons that I stay here is because we consistently get to put up slides like this, where we win. We pretty much take across the board when these analysts do their analyses. Symantec's been the market leader for over a decade, and the reason for that is, and I'll talk here in just a moment about the capabilities that it provides. So data protection, first and foremost, is about understanding what your data is and where it is. And inside of your agency, if you look across this massive list of acronyms, chances are you've got probably one of every one of those and a few that we don't even have on the list. So the big question is, how do you make sense of that, particularly in light of the fact that there's a lot of overlap in form and format? Okay? I've got a social security number. Well, that could be a phone number in certain parts of the world. It could be a routing number or a part number, things like that. It might overlap with your employee ID. So it's not just the case that, hey, this is real easy. It's this, this particular format, 3 digits, 2 digits, 1 digit with a dash in the middle. That may or may not make sense in context. So you need an automated way to figure that out across all your various platforms and services. And then you run into some serious challenges, like what do I do about information that's embedded in forms? Okay? So that's a real struggle for a lot of agencies. I intentionally did not use the government version of this to talk about, oops, sorry about that, one extra, because I've actually given a similar presentation in the past, and there were folks in the audience that had the breaches that I had up on the slide. So rather than put anybody through that, I do want to point out, though, that making sure that you've done the classification of your data is really the first step in ensuring that it's appropriately secured. Okay? So with that said, what data loss prevention essentially is all about is giving you a variety of different ways to sort through your data across all of your stores in your enterprise and ensuring that it's appropriately bucketed. And then you take that and you say, okay, well, this particular compliance suite requires me to understand the data here and to secure it in this way. Okay, so it's all about classifying your data, making sure that it's appropriately understood, And we've got a variety of different techniques for doing that, everything from machine learning and a rule set and so forth. We can get into the details if you'd like at some other point in time. The important thing to take away is there are a variety of different ways to do this, and we've got them all covered inside of the DLP system. And then you take the end results and you ensure that you have appropriate responses, either securing in an appropriate way, or if it's a relatively recent action, making sure you clamp down on the individuals who are violating policy or whatever the response happens to be. Okay? So in a nutshell, that's the data protection problem. It's, again, all about classifying, and the most important aspect of this is, if you can, try to establish that as a service that goes across the entire enterprise, because the last thing you want to have to do is to set this up multiple times for multiple areas. You don't want a different one for the cloud, for your network, for your endpoints, and so forth. Put it in place once, get a team really good at that, build the policies for that, and have those capabilities go across your enterprise. Okay, so it's a core service that you can leverage. So let's talk about one of those critical areas that you need to cover, the emerging area, and that's the cloud. As I go around the federal government, what I've found is that most agencies, and we saw a little bit of this still reflected on the panel, most agencies still have a fair amount of legacy, but the cloud is emerging very quickly. Okay? And so just very briefly, what I'm going to walk through is the security component that started to arise in the environment here today. It's called a Cloud Access Security Broker. And I'm just going to quickly talk about what it is, what it does. But first, let me give you the old Symantec commercial here, the other nice slide that I get to show, another set of market leaders here. Okay? So these are the use cases that a Cloud Access Security Broker will solve. Okay? First and foremost, what applications is my agency using? You may often have heard the sidebar term shadow IT. On the panel, they talked about the fact that people are using cloud applications and so forth. More often than not, the cloud applications that they're using are the ones that they found through their search engine, because we talked about the workflow, right? Well, it's often the case that in the middle of that workflow or that work process, that process stream, they're using apps that weren't necessarily offered or blessed by your agency. And where do they find those things? Out in the cloud somewhere, and they just start to use them. Well, chances are, if they're using those apps and they're free, they're getting something. The people that offer those apps are getting something out of that. More often than not, it's your data. Okay? So helping you understand what cloud apps are being used, understanding what information is being stored in the cloud, and then it's some of the same core services that we talked about before, preventing viruses and malware, ensuring appropriate security for unsanctioned apps, for personal accounts. What do you do about the well-meaning employee who's taking home financial data from the agency to work on it at home? There are a lot of security protections, so I'm just going to put this thing in my personal Google Drive and I'll work on it at home. That's a real problem for a lot of agencies. Okay? What do you do about BYOD? So all of these kinds of issues are things that the Cloud Access Security Broker was built to solve. Okay? Let me just take you through really quickly. Starts with what we call an audit. Okay? The audit just looks at all of the information in all of your cloud applications. Where does that information come from? Well, you've already got that information stored in your environment. Typically, it comes from your network device logs or your SIM or the logs that come out of your endpoint protection solutions. All of that information is already captured. What the CASB does, or what the Cloud Access Security Broker does really, is it just understands how to parse through those hieroglyphics, make sense of it all, and then in our case, we marry that up with a database of cloud apps that we've collected, and we just show you, hey, here are the 54 or 2,000 or how many ever apps happen to be in your environment, sanctioned apps and unsanctioned apps, which I'll tell you in advance will be the higher percentage more than likely, and what the risk profile is of each of those apps, and then what does that mean on a weighted average basis for your agency. It's a great exercise. If you haven't done this before, we'll offer this out for you gratis, and I've seen many commercial customers and agencies where you learn a lot by going through this process. Just if nothing else, what you don't know today, this will tell you what you don't know. Okay? So second step then is, again, your classic antivirus, anti-malware solution here. In our case, what we do is we leverage our global intelligence network. Again, you guys may be aware of this. Symantec owns the largest civilian intelligence network or threat intelligence network in the world. The only one that's larger is the US federal government, and they take all of our data feeds and build on top of that. Okay? We scan about 1/3 of the world's email every day, And we've got over 9 trillion rows of data in our telemetry. So there's a tremendous amount of value in leveraging that for the virus malware problem set. Okay. Actually, I already talked about that. So, and then the last one is the user behavior problem. I characterized this earlier as kind of the Edward Snowden, and that, for some odd reason, when I tell that joke outside of the government, people look at me like, who? Oh, yeah. Every time I tell that, every time I make that statement inside of the government, everybody gets it just like that. It's basically looking at what people are doing, how they're doing it, and where they're doing it, and looking for patterns. And when they deviate from those patterns, you start to raise their threat score. And this is an actual example of a threat tree of an individual user, and we track the data, the usage of their behavior, and then we look and we see what they're doing, and as they start to deviate from the pattern of normalcy, or they start to violate common sense. Somebody logs off in Boston, 3 hours later they're logging in Kazakhstan, probably not likely to make that trip that quickly, so that would be a problem that we would flag as well. Okay? So those are the various areas of coverage that a cloud access security broker will help you with. The one that I've left out here is this problem. I've got files flying all over the place. Some areas that I own, some areas that I don't. I've got Gmail. Well, I didn't own that, but I do own Office 365. Salesforce, I do own that. I don't own Dropbox. So I need to understand the various types of information that's going up in there, and I need to put it in its correct compliance categories. That sounds a lot like that data protection thing that I talked about earlier. And in fact, it is. That's another one of the core services that a cloud access security broker will bring to the table, helping you understand the types of information that's available to you in your sanctioned and ideally in your unsanctioned apps in the cloud. Okay, so what I've talked about here, for those of you who are kind of drawing this through in your head, is I mentioned an enterprise class service, data loss prevention, DLP. The implication for most of you is, hey, I've got to put that in my existing data center or on my premise so that I can scan all the stuff that I currently own. And he just talked about another one that lives up in the cloud. I'm not sure I want to put 2 of these in place. So the nice thing about that is you don't need to. The way that we've architected this is you leverage the service that's put in place for the enterprise, but you do your policy management and scanning up in the cloud for cloud-based assets only. So the policies go into the cloud, the scanning is done in the cloud for the cloud-based things, the policies for your existing data center and for your existing environment stay where they are, and you kind of get the best of both worlds there. One single service that you're leveraging across all those various areas into the cloud. The scanning that's required for the cloud is done in the cloud. The policies that are needed in the cloud are sent to the cloud. And you don't have duplication of effort, you don't have multiple teams, you don't have multiple policies and sets like that. Okay? So it's a pretty straightforward scenario, and I think you'll see this as you continue to learn more and more about Symantec. This is exactly how we're architecting everything. Core services that we can leverage across your network, across your endpoints, and of course up to the cloud as necessary. Okay? So with that said, let me just kind of summarize here. We talked a little bit about CDM. Again, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's a program that DHS has built. It's particularly for civilian agencies, and the focus is to assist you in getting in the large, heavy lift security components. We can assist you with that. As I indicated, we have folks on our team whose job is specifically to assist you with CDM. In terms of a couple of priority areas, data protection and cloud are scenarios that we can assist you with, and they're both available today on GSA through the CDM program. Okay, so that was a bit of a brisk walk through. I didn't hit a lot of low-level detail, but hopefully I gave you a good idea of some areas that we might be able to assist and some areas of coverage. Are there any questions or things that you guys might want to drill down on at this stage?
Hey John, I have a quick question. Turn my mic on back there now. Can you hear me?
Here.
All right, quick question. So on the panel, there was a consistent theme about better visibility across data as we move into the cloud and being able to prioritize data and secure data where the data lives.
Yep.
But also to be able to collapse your existing security architecture and simplify and have a consistent approach to security across your on-prem and off-prem environment and really take this opportunity to modernize and consolidate. So can you talk to a little bit, without getting too much in the weeds, but how the tools that you talked about here with DLP and CASB can help you do that, help you consolidate your security environment, remove complexity and operational complexity and cost inefficiency, but overall improve your security posture by better indexing your data and leveraging some of the cloud security tools that are available.
Yeah, I think the key is one of the points that I talked about earlier is as you look at different areas, the network, the endpoints, and cloud, and particularly the cloud. The cloud in particular is one that's going to have the most amount of seduction of, hey, I'll stand up a cloud version of that. I can't tell you how many times I see agencies where, oh, there's a cloud one of those, I'll just use that. It's a very easy way to transition in, but often what you find is, well, we're doing this thing over here, we're going to call that the legacy thing, and we got a cloud thing over there, and now you got two different teams and you're not always in sync. So I guess the rule number one is, to the degree that you can, put in place one core service and try to leverage it across as many places as you can. Okay, so that's probably the most important scenario, or probably the most important rule. If you can adhere to that rule, put it in place once. Now, what you'll typically find, and the reason that agencies often violate this is to be most useful, because of where agencies often are, those core services will typically be leveraged from a legacy perspective. And, well, we're going to the cloud, we don't necessarily want to use that. And frankly, in some cases, there's good reason for that. We talked a little bit about lift and shift. If you're too wedded in the legacy world, you're going to just do what you're doing the old way and just stick it up in the cloud. And we've already heard that doesn't work very well. Okay? So what you ideally need to look for are situations where, if you're doing a traditional waterfall method, you've got tools that work for that. If you're doing a more modern DevOps scenario, you've got tools that work for that, and ideally they'll work together seamlessly across. And candidly, that's, again, not to give you too much of a Symantec commercial here, but that's one of our guiding principles, to make sure that we give you coverage across. And frankly, I think the DLP is a good example of that. We've got other solutions that secure both the more traditional data centers. You can use the same console to secure the workloads that run in your data center as the workloads that run in the cloud. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to bring to bear here to make sure that you're not in that situation where, gosh, I got to use this one up in the cloud and I got to use that one in my legacy environment, and now I got to make tough choices. Ideally, you look for vendors and solutions that will allow you to straddle both. Okay, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, I guess since I'm the last speaker here, I'm not sure whether it's I've done a good job of filling it in or I'm incentivizing you to get out of here. So I'll take it as a compliment. So, good. I'm going to hand it back to Chris.
Thanks, John. Good job.